Okay, so here we go. We've arrived at the moment. The artist's talk. Stop me if you've heard this one. I'll begin with a short history of my practice. Short. Now, whether or not you've been looking forward to this talk, I have for 2 or 3 months with great fear and trepidation. Because I really don't have any great insight into what I'm up to, or what I'm doing, or why I'm doing it. But I've found that I won't let that stop me. I'll just forge ahead, and if I start talking, I'm sure something will come up, and it could be that I'll learn something important about my work. Now, I just realized at the age of 74 just how long I've been beavering away at this. I used to be somewhat proud of the fact that I was still producing at 34, 35 or so while wrestling with raising kids and paying a mortgage and so on. Now at 74, it's beginning to be embarrassing somehow. I should have grown up by now. At any rate, the point is that I've always been intrigued and confounded by the reality that we are enmeshed in, a place of immense and miraculous beauty, paired with unimaginable carnage, destruction, and suffering. There is in operation a mighty force, a merciless and relentless logic that folds and mixes where we are both end products and ingredients. And then we die. This absurdity fascinated me and led me as an artist to seek out or create those images that reflected this strange and alienating situation. Those moments when I felt, as an old Irish phrase has it, close to a tin place. The full Celtic saying is, heaven and earth are only 3 feet apart, but in thin places, that distance is even shorter. I find this a sympathetic expression of that moment when we lock onto an image where all its parts fit and together in ways evincing some ambiguous undercurrent or presence. There's another, less poetic turn of phrase from the world of public relations and advertising, helping clients identify the optimum frame and establishing it in the public mind. A sentence that further underlines how malleable and unreliable our perceptions are, and how susceptible and vulnerable to easy manipulation. We tend to see what we believe, to see the world not as it is, but as we are. Anais Nin is reported to have said that. In any case, at that point, I was never interested and have never been interested in creating surrealist, dreamlike imagery, but rather ordinary, everyday situations that don't lend themselves to ordinary, everyday interpretation. And I was constructing them with little or no trace of the artist's presence. In retrospect, I was operating much as a magician in that the completed piece was like a trick, and it was important to hide the means of achieving that trick so as not to infect it with aesthetic or painterly intentions. So at some point, a friend of mine in Salmon Arm, Harold Nix, coerced me into trying my hand at painting on plein air, where I discovered this entirely new approach to making images. Using oil paint, I had always used acrylic, as one can work on the surface continuously because it doesn't dry, or it dries quickly rather. And battling mosquitoes and quickly changing light effects, one soon learns to work quickly and somewhat instinctively. This led to my becoming more aware of the plastic and expressive qualities of the medium itself, and as it became more difficult to determine where paint ended and potential image began, I just sort of left recognizable image behind, and instead of using the medium to represent something other than itself, I began to play with just making paint look good. And for perhaps the next 12 or 15 years, that's all I did. Now, although I'm still doing abstract work, I recently have begun once again to do realist figurative work with a slightly different goal. I no longer aim for photographic verisimilitude. Verisimilitude. That's a great word. I'd name my daughter that if I had one. But now I'm satisfied with achieving an image that is just believable enough to provoke an emotional response in the viewer. You know, helping the viewer identify the optimum frame and all of that. For me, the creative part of making a realist work is mainly taken up with settling on an image. Sifting through photographs, doing rough sketches, putting parts of photographs together, until I achieve an image that feels close to the thin place I mentioned above. Once a decision on the image has been made, an end goal is established, and now it's pretty much a matter of solving problems, beginning with the drafting of the image onto a surface and going about making pigment and medium represent something other than itself. As I mentioned, I'm not primarily interested in achieving a high or photographic realistic rendering, but merely believability. This demands attention and a certain doggedness in problem solving, and I don't really have a fail-safe approach. I sort of learn how to do each one as I do it. I'm always looking, it's kind of like knitting or constructing a building, in that I'm always looking towards the end goal, and while I'm working, I often think of something I read long ago describing painting as akin to piling a load of bricks one at a time onto the roof of a building and producing the final hoped-for effect by pushing the pile off onto an innocent bystander. As completing a realist piece takes a great deal of time, I also think about a number of other things, of course. Things like how bloody long this is taking, how many photographic images have been taken and distributed around the globe while I've finished this few square inches, and how my particular form of OCD could become dangerous. Now beginning in abstract is a different sort of animal. Here I begin, with apologies to Zorba, by loosening my belt and inviting the universe into the studio as I stare at a blank canvas, preparing to make a mark. I sometimes become frozen in a crisis of ambivalence as to what and where to make this mark, but I've become more trusting of my instincts and now pretty much reach for a can of spray paint or a bigger brush and just begin. The real difference now is that I'm beginning an image with no idea of what it is I'm going to achieve. The blank canvas presents one with a veritable infinity of options, and this first mark immediately limits those options. Where the next mark is applied and what color, etc., will be in part determined by the mark already made, and this process of limiting options carries on until one actually runs out of them. And anywhere along the way, a mark or a gesture, either intended or accidental, can change the direction of the work and present an entirely new set of options which demand a response, and so on. In this respect, completing an abstract is one of manifestation as opposed to construction, as it requires a level of unknowingness and openness to suggestion and a tolerance for ambiguity until one does run out of options or interest. Michelangelo is rumored to have said something to the effect that art is never finished, only abandoned. I can make up more stuff.